Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man's Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is William Windwalker, but everyone calls me Bill. I'm a forest ranger here in West Virginia, and I've been working these mountains for 16 years. People trust me because I know what I'm doing. I fought in World War II, learned how to stay calm when things go bad, and I've pulled more lost hikers off these cliffs than I can count. Seneca Rocks is my beat. 900 feet of straight-up quartzite that draws rock climbers from all over the country. It's a beautiful place, but it's dangerous too. The rock is sharp, the weather changes fast, and if you fall, well, let's just say I've seen what happens when people don't respect the mountain. June of 1961 was when it all started. Summer was coming on strong, and the climbing season was in full swing. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, warm days, cool nights. But something felt different that year. The air had a strange weight to it, like before a storm that never comes. I grew up hearing the old Seneca stories about these rocks. My grandmother was part Seneca, and she always said this place was sacred. The old people called it a dancing ground for spirits. They said during certain times of year, you could see shadow people dancing on the cliff faces where no human could possibly stand. I never paid much attention to those stories. I'm a practical man. I deal with real problems: broken bones, lost climbers, equipment failures. But that summer, I started hearing things from the climbers that made me wonder. It began with small reports. Climbers saying they saw people on parts of the cliff where there were no routes. Figures moving on the rock face during the early morning hours when the light was just right. At first, I figured it was tricks of light and shadow. The rock formations can play games with your eyes, especially when you're tired or scared. But then I started finding things that didn't make sense. Footprints. Human footprints on ledges that you'd need ropes and technical gear to reach. Except these prints were barefoot, and they were in places where even experienced climbers wouldn't go without protection. I'm good at reading sign. The war taught me that. These weren't made by any climber I knew. The prints were small, like a child's, but perfectly formed. And they were old. Not fresh tracks, but somehow pressed into the rock itself, like they'd been there for years. That should have been impossible. You can't leave footprints in solid quartzite. I started paying closer attention to the climbers' reports. 3 different parties in 1 week told me they'd seen people dancing on the vertical sections of the north face. Not climbing, dancing, moving across the rock like they were on flat ground. Each group described the same thing. Figures that looked human but moved wrong. They danced in patterns, spinning and jumping, always in the shadows cast by the overhanging rock. And when the climbers called out to them or tried to get closer, the figures would fade away like mist. I'm not one to dismiss what people tell me, but this was hard to swallow. Still, I've learned to trust my gut, and something was definitely wrong on Seneca Rocks that summer. The breaking point came on June 18th. A party of 4 experienced climbers, good people who'd been coming here for years, called down from halfway up the South Peak. Their leader, Tom Bradley, was shouting something about needing help. His voice carried a kind of panic I'd never heard from him before. I grabbed my rescue gear and started climbing up to reach them. Tom was a solid climber, someone who didn't scare easy. If he was calling for help, something was seriously wrong. When I reached their position on a good ledge about 400 feet up, I found them huddled together like scared children. Tom's face was white, and his hands were shaking as he pointed to the rock wall across from us. "Bill," he said, his voice barely steady, "look at that wall. Tell me what you see." I looked where he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the familiar gray quartzite, some cracks and ledges, the normal shadows cast by the afternoon sun. Then I saw it, and my blood went cold. There were shadows on that wall that didn't belong to anything. Human-shaped shadows moving independently, dancing in patterns that made no sense. They were dark against the rock, but they moved with purpose, spinning and leaping like they were celebrating something. But here's what made it impossible. There was nothing casting those shadows. No people, no objects, Nothing at all. Just shadows dancing on stone. That's when I knew my grandmother's stories weren't just stories. I helped Tom's group down from the mountain, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Over the next few days, I started noticing more things that weren't right. The shadows around Seneca Rocks had always been normal. Dark spots where the sun couldn't reach, moving predictably as the day progressed. But now they seemed to have their own life. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, turn to look and find shadows in places where nothing should cast them. Animals were acting strange, too. Birds avoided flying near the cliff face. Deer that usually grazed in the meadow below would bolt if they got too close. Even my old dog Rex, who'd been with me on countless rescues, refused to go near the base of the rocks after sunset. I started keeping detailed notes, trying to find a pattern. The shadow activity was strongest just after sunrise and before sunset. It happened more often when the moon was getting full, and it always centered around the same section of cliff, an area the old Seneca stories said was used for ceremonies. A week after Tom's group saw the dancing shadows, a solo climber named Jake Morrison went missing. Jake was experienced, careful, someone who always filed proper route plans and had the right gear. When he didn't check in by evening, I organized a search. We found his gear at the base of the cliff, his rope, his pack, his climbing shoes, all arranged in a neat circle around a flat stone. But Jake was nowhere to be found. That's not how climbing accidents work. When someone falls, their gear scatters. It doesn't arrange itself in patterns. I called in help from the state rescue team, and we spent 2 days covering every ledge and crack on that mountain. Nothing. It was like Jake had simply vanished into the rock itself. On the second night of searching, I was rappelling down the north face with my flashlight when I saw something that made me freeze on the rope. There was Jake. He was standing on a tiny ledge about 50 feet below me, perfectly balanced on a shelf barely wide enough for 1 foot. But he wasn't climbing gear. He was barefoot, wearing only his base layer clothes, and he was moving in the same dancing patterns I'd seen in the shadows. "Jake," I called out. "Jake, can you hear me?" He looked up at me, and what I saw in his face still gives me nightmares. His eyes were empty, like looking into deep water. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. And behind him, on the rock wall, his shadow was dancing too. But it was dancing a different dance than his body was doing. I rappelled down as fast as I could, but when I reached the ledge, Jake was gone. Just gone. Like he'd never been there at all. But something was there. Burned into the rock where Jake had been standing was the perfect outline of a human shadow. Not carved, not painted, burned right into the stone like a brand. I touched the shadow outline with my glove. The rock was ice cold, even though the day had been warm. And for just a second, I swear I felt the shadow try to grab my hand. I got off that mountain fast. The next morning, I called Jake's family and the author. Riddies. Officially, Jake Morrison was missing, presumed dead in a climbing accident. But I knew better. Whatever had happened to Jake wasn't any kind of accident. I started researching the old Seneca stories more seriously. I drove to the reservation and talked to Joseph Crow Feather, an elder who knew the traditional tales. What he told me made everything click into place. "That place you call Seneca Rocks," Joseph said, "we call it Dancing Stone. It's where our ancestors would go to speak with the shadow spirits, the spirits who guard the line between this world and the next." He explained that, according to tradition, the shadow spirits were ancestors who had died in sacred ways. They became guardians of powerful places, protecting them from those who would misuse or disrespect the spiritual energy there. "But the spirits are hungry," Joseph warned me. "They need life force to maintain their dance. Usually they take a little from many people. Not enough to hurt, just enough to keep strong. But if someone comes to their sacred place without respect, without proper protection..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "How do you protect yourself?" I asked. Joseph reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Tobacco," he said, "and the right prayers. But you have to mean it. You have to really respect what you're dealing with." I took the pouch he offered me, though I wasn't sure I believed it would help. but I was starting to believe in a lot of things I wouldn't have believed a month earlier. That evening, I went back to Seneca Rocks. I had to see for myself what was happening after dark. I set up camp at the base of the cliff with a clear view of the north face. As the sun went down, I could feel something building in the air, like pressure before a storm, but different. Anticipation, maybe, or hunger. Just after full dark, they came. Dozens of them. Shadow figures emerged from cracks in the rock, from overhangs, from places where shadows shouldn't be able to exist. They moved across the vertical cliff face like it was flat ground, dancing in complex patterns that seemed to tell a story. Some were clearly human-shaped. Others were harder to define, flowing, changing forms that might have been people once, but had become something else. They danced together in groups, separated into individual displays, came back together in larger formations. And they were beautiful. That was the most unsettling part. Whatever they were, whatever they wanted, their dance was the most graceful, haunting thing I'd ever seen. I found myself wanting to get closer, to join them somehow. That's when I realized I was standing up, walking toward the cliff base without remembering deciding to do it. I stopped myself, but just barely. My shadow was stretched out in front of me in the moonlight, and as I watched in horror, it started to move independently. It was reaching toward the dancing figures, trying to join them. I backed away fast, and my shadow snapped back to normal, but I could feel their attention on me now. The dancing figures had noticed me, and some of them had started moving down the cliff face in my direction. I grabbed my gear and got out of there. But as I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, shadow figures dancing at the base of the road, calling me back. That night, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them dancing, and I could feel my shadow trying to pull away from my body, trying to go back to them. The next morning brought new trouble. Janet Rockhart, one of the best technical climbers in the state, arrived with her partner Mike Chen to attempt a new route on the east face. I knew Janet from previous rescues. She was skilled, careful, and tough as nails. If anyone could handle whatever was happening on Seneca Rocks, it would be her. I tried to warn them off. I told them about the missing climber, about the strange sightings, about everything I'd seen. But Janet just laughed. "Come on, Bill," she said. "You don't really believe in ghost stories, do you? Jake probably just had an accident and fell in a spot where we haven't found him. Yet." Mike was less dismissive, but he followed Janet's lead. They were planning a 3-day climb, camping on ledges, taking their time with a technically challenging route that had never been completed. Against my better judgment, I let them go. They were experienced adults. They'd filed proper plans, and I couldn't legally stop them based on what I'd seen. But I made them promise to check in by radio every few hours. For the first day, everything seemed normal. They made good progress up the cliff. Their radio calls were routine, and I started to think maybe the shadow spirits only appeared to certain people or under specific conditions. I was wrong. The second morning, I got a frantic radio call from Janet. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. "Bill, we need help up here. Mike's hurt bad and something's wrong with the rope." I grabbed my rescue gear and headed up the approach trail. As I climbed toward their last known position, I could hear Janet calling for help. But there was something odd about the sound. It seemed to echo in ways that didn't match the rock formations. I reached the base of their route and looked up. I could see Janet on a ledge about 300 feet up. But something was wrong with the picture. She was moving strangely, like she was struggling with something I couldn't see. I started climbing up to reach her, following the route they'd taken. As I got higher, I could see more clearly what was happening. Mike was lying on the ledge, but he wasn't moving. And Janet wasn't alone up there. Dark shapes were moving around her, not quite solid, not quite empty. Shadow figures, but these ones weren't dancing. They were circling her like predators. "Janet," I called out, "I'm coming up." She looked down at me, and what I saw in her face was pure terror. "Bill," she shouted back, "they're trying to take my shadow." I climbed faster than I'd ever climbed, bed before. When I reached their ledge, the scene was even worse than I'd feared. Mike was dead. Not from a fall, not from any climbing accident I'd ever seen. He was lying peacefully, like he'd just gone to sleep, but his skin was gray and cold. And beneath his body, burned into the rock, was the perfect outline of his shadow. The shadow figures were all around us now, more solid than I'd seen them before. They moved like smoke, but cast their own shadows on the rock, and they were focused entirely on Janet. As I watched in horror, Janet's shadow began to separate from her body. It started at her feet, slowly peeling away like old paint. Where it separated, her skin went pale, and her movements became sluggish. "Fight it, Janet!" I shouted, pulling out the tobacco pouch Joseph had given me. "Don't let them take it!" I scattered tobacco on the rock and tried to remember the prayers Joseph had taught me. The shadow figures hesitated, pulling back slightly, but they didn't retreat. That's when I realized what was happening. These weren't just random spirits looking for energy. They were specifically targeting people who climbed the sacred rock without permission, without proper respect. They were protecting their territory, the only way they knew how. I helped Janet rappel down from the ledge, but the shadow theft continued as we descended. By the time we reached the ground, she'd lost about half her shadow, and she could barely stand. "I feel empty," she whispered as I helped her to my truck. "Like something vital is draining out of me." I drove her to the hospital, but what could I tell the doctors? That her shadow was being stolen by spirits? They treated her for exhaustion and mild hypothermia, but they couldn't see what was really happening. Over the next few days, Janet got weaker. Her remaining shadow continued to fade, and she spent most of her time sleeping. Doctors ran tests but couldn't find anything wrong with her. Officially, she was suffering from severe trauma and exhaustion from her partner's death. But I knew better. The shadow spirits had marked her, and they were slowly draining her life force. If I didn't do something soon, she'd end up like Mike, just another climbing accident with no logical explanation. That's when more climbers started disappearing. 3 different incidents over the next week. All experienced climbers, all following proper safety procedures, all vanishing without a trace. Each time we'd find their gear arranged in circles at the base of the cliff, and each time we'd find shadow outlines burned into the rock. The pattern was becoming clear. The shadow spirits were getting bolder, more aggressive. What had started as isolated incidents was becoming an organized campaign. They wanted the climbers off their sacred mountain, and they were willing to kill to make their point. I tried to get the climbing area closed, but the Forest Service needed more evidence than stories about dancing shadows. Park officials demanded proof, documentation, something concrete they could put in a report. So I decided to get them their proof. On the night of June 28th, just 2 days before the full moon, I went back to Seneca Rocks with a camera and recording equipment. If I could document what was happening, maybe I could convince the authorities to take action before more people died. I set up my equipment at the base of the cliff and waited. Just after midnight, as the moon reached its highest point, the shadows began to move. This time was different. Instead of the graceful dancing I'd seen before, the shadow figures were agitated, aggressive. They poured out of the rock like smoke, dozens of them, all moving with purpose. They weren't just dancing anymore. They were hunting. I watched through my camera as the shadows spread out across the cliff face, searching every ledge and crack. They were looking for something specific, and it didn't take long to figure out what. They were looking for Jan. The shadow spirits had sensed that she was still alive, still carrying part of her shadow. They wanted to finish what they'd started. As I watched, the shadows began moving down from the cliff toward the road, toward town, following the trail Janet and I had taken to the hospital. That's when I realized the true scope of what I was dealing with. These weren't just territorial spirits protecting a climbing area. They were intelligent, organized, and capable of leaving their mountain to hunt their prey. I packed up my equipment and raced back to town, driving as fast as I dared on the winding mountain roads. I had to reach Janet before they did, but when I got to the hospital, I was too late. Janet was gone. Not dead, gone. Her hospital bed was empty, the window was open, and there were no signs of struggle. The security guards hadn't seen anything. According to all official records, Janet Rockhart had simply vanished. But I knew where she'd gone. The shadows had called her back to their dancing ground, and this time I knew they wouldn't let her leave alive. I drove back to Seneca Rocks with a sick feeling in my gut. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, but the shadows around the cliff face seemed darker than ever. I could feel the weight of ancient eyes watching me as I approached the base of the rock. My equipment from the night before was still there, but something had been added to it. Arranged in a perfect circle around my camera case were dozens of small stones, each one carved with symbols I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were an invitation, or maybe a challenge. I looked up at the cliff face and saw her. Janet was standing on an impossible narrow ledge about 200 feet up, moving in the same slow, hypnotic dance patterns I'd seen from the other victims. But she was still partly herself. I could see her fighting against whatever was controlling her movements. "Janet!" I called out. My voice echoed off the rock in ways that sounded wrong, like the mountain itself was changing the words. She looked down at me, and for a moment, her eyes cleared. "Bill," she called back, "I can't stop dancing. They won't let me stop." Around her, the shadow figures were more solid than I'd ever seen them. They had definite shapes now. Men and women in traditional Seneca clothing, but made of living darkness. They danced in complex patterns around Janet, weaving her movements into their ancient ceremony. I pulled out the tobacco pouch Joseph had given me and held it up. "I want to talk," I shouted to the shadows. "I want to understand what you need." The dancing stopped. The sudden silence was more frightening than any sound. Every shadow figure on the cliff face turned to look at me. The weight of their attention was like a physical force pressing down on my shoulders. One of the shadow dancers began moving down the cliff toward me. As it descended, it became more solid, more human-looking. By the time it reached the ground, I could see it clearly. An elderly Seneca man wearing traditional ceremonial dress, but translucent, like looking at someone through dark water. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once. From the rocks, from the wind, from the ground under my feet. "You show respect," the shadow spirit said. "That is rare among your people." "I'm trying to understand," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Why are you taking the climbers?" The spirit gestured toward the cliff face. "This is sacred ground. For centuries our people came here to dance with the spirits of the dead, to seek wisdom from those who had crossed over. It is a place where the barriers between worlds are thin." He paused, and I could feel the sadness in his presence like a cold wind. "When your people came with their ropes and metal tools, treating our sacred mountain like a playground, we tried to warn them. We danced in their sight, showed them our presence, hoping they would understand and leave us in peace. But they didn't understand," I said. "No, they ignored our warnings. Some even mocked what they saw, calling us tricks of light. So we began taking what we needed to maintain our vigil, small portions of life force, barely noticeable to the living." The spirit moved closer, and I could see the ancient pain in his translucent features. But it was not enough. The sacred dances require more energy than we could safely take without harming people. So we began taking shadows, the spiritual essence that connects the soul to the body. A shadow freely given sustains us for months. A shadow taken by force. He gestured toward Janet. That requires the whole person. She didn't give permission, I said. No. But she climbed our sacred rock without permission, without respect. By Seneca law, her shadow is forfeit. I looked up at Janet, still trapped in the endless dance. What if I could give you what you need willingly? What if I could make a bargain? The shadow spirit studied me carefully. You would risk your own shadow to save hers? If that's what it takes? It is not that simple, the spirit said. The sacred dance requires specific energy given at specific times. Your shadow alone would not be sufficient. My heart sank, but the spirit continued. However, there is another way. If you could convince your people to respect our sacred times, to stay away during the months when we must perform our ceremonies, We could return to taking small amounts from many rather than everything from a few. What months? I asked. The summer months, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest, from the spring planting moon to the harvest moon. 6 months of each year, when the sacred rock must be left to us alone. I thought about it. Closing Seneca Rocks for half the year would be a hard sell to the Forest Service, but it was better than letting people die. I can try, said, but I'll need proof that you'll honor the agreement. Janet has to be returned safely. The shadow spirit was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You show wisdom as well. As respect, he said. We will return the woman's shadow, but you must seal this bargain in the traditional way. How? Instead of answering, he gestured for me to follow him. I found myself walking toward the base of the cliff, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. At the foot of the rock face, there was a natural stone platform I'd never noticed before. Place your hand on the sacred stone, the spirit instructed. Offer tobacco and speak your promise aloud, but know this, if you break faith with us, your shadow will be the first we claim. I pulled out the tobacco pouch and emptied it onto the stone platform. The wind carried the scent up toward the cliff face, and I heard whispers of approval from the shadows above. I promise, I said aloud, pressing my palm against the cold stone, to keep climbers away from Seneca Rocks during your sacred season. I promise to teach respect for this place and its guardians. I promise to honor the agreement between our peoples. The moment I spoke the words, I felt something change. The stone under my hand grew warm, and my shadow on the ground seemed to darken and deepen. I was connected to this place now in ways I didn't fully understand. The shadow spirit nodded. It is done. He turned toward the cliff and called out in a language I didn't recognize. The shadow figures around Janet began to move differently, no longer trapping her in their patterns, but guiding her down toward the ground. As she descended, I could see her shadow returning to her body like dark water flowing back into its proper channel. Her movements became more natural, more human, until finally she was rappelling down the rock face under her own power. When she reached the ground, Janet collapsed into my arms, exhausted, but alive. Did I dream all that? She whispered. No, I said, looking up at the cliff face where the shadow figures were already beginning to fade with the rising sun. But it's over now. The shadow spirit was the last to disappear. Before he faded completely, he spoke one final time. Remember your promise, William Windwalker. Our patience has limits. Getting the climbing restrictions approved took 3 months of bureaucratic battles, incident reports, and carefully worded recommendations. I couldn't exactly tell the Forest Service that I'd made a deal with shadow spirits, so I focused on cultural sensitivity and Native American sacred site protection. The official policy that went into effect closed specific routes on Seneca Rocks from May through October each year. The restrictions cited wildlife protection during breeding season and cultural preservation concerns. Climbers could still use other areas of the formation, but the most popular routes, the ones that passed through the shadow spirit's sacred ground, were off-limits during the summer months. Janet recovered fully, though she never climbed Seneca Rocks again. She moved to Colorado and focused on safer peaks in the Rockies. Sometimes she sends me postcards from her adventures, but she never mentions what happened that night on the cliff. The disappearances stopped immediately after the restrictions went into effect. The strange shadow activity continued during the closed season, but climbers no longer reported seeing dancing figures or unexplained movements on the rock face. The spirits had what they needed: privacy to perform their ancient ceremonies without interference. I kept my promise about education too. I developed a program for visiting climbers about respecting Native American sacred sites. Most people think it's just politically correct nonsense, but a few understand that some places deserve special consideration. Those are the ones I tell the real stories to, late at night around campfires, when the mood is right and the audience is ready to listen. Joseph Crow Feather visited me a few months after the agreement went into effect. He didn't seem surprised by anything I told him about the shadow spirits. They've been waiting a long time for someone to listen, he said. My grandfather said this would happen someday, that a bridge person would come, someone who could speak to both worlds. He gave me a new medicine pouch, this one filled with sage and sweetgrass along with the tobacco. For the other places, he said, you'll be needed again. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. Over the years since Seneca Rocks, I've encountered similar spirits at other locations throughout Appalachia. Not all of them are as reasonable as the shadow dancers. Some are angry, violent, protective of their territory in ways that don't allow for negotiation. But the principles are the same: respect, understanding, and the willingness to acknowledge that some places belong to powers older than our maps and regulations. I retired from the Forest Service in 1978, but I still visit Seneca Rocks regularly. During the permitted climbing season, I work as an unofficial guide, helping people understand the technical challenges and the cultural significance of the area. During the closed season, I maintain the traditional offerings at the base of the cliff: tobacco, sage, and sometimes a small amount of cornmeal. The shadow dancers still perform their ceremonies. If you know where to look and when to watch, you can sometimes see them during the full moon, gracefully moving across the vertical rock face in patterns that tell stories of the time before white men came to these mountains. They've never spoken to me again directly, but I know they're aware of me. Sometimes, when I'm hiking alone near the cliff base, I'll notice that my shadow is moving slightly differently than it should, nodding acknowledgement to presences I can't see. The agreement has held for over 60 years now. Climbers respect the seasonal closures, the spirits have their sacred time, and people still get to experience the challenge and beauty of Seneca Rocks during the permitted months. But every year, I get reports from other areas: Devil's Tower in Wyoming, the Needles in South Dakota, various cliff formations throughout the Southwest, places where climbers are seeing things that don't make sense, where people are disappearing under circumstances that can't be explained by equipment failure or human error. I pass along what I can: advice about respect, protocols for approaching sacred sites, the importance of listening to local indigenous knowledge. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. The world is changing, but the old powers remain. They've learned to adapt, to work within our system of laws and regulations when possible. But they haven't forgotten their purpose, and they haven't lost their ability to protect what they consider sacred. So if you're planning to climb in areas with Native American heritage, remember what I learned at Seneca Rocks. Some mountains are meant to be climbed, others are meant to climb you. The difference is in knowing which is which, and having the wisdom to respect the answer. Pay attention to the shadows. They have stories to tell, if you're willing to listen. And always carry tobacco. You never know when you might need to make an offering to powers that predate your understanding of what's possible. The shadow dancers are still out there, in places where the barrier between worlds runs thin. They're watching, waiting, protecting sacred ground in the only way they know how. Respect their vigil, and they'll respect your passage. Ignore their warnings at your own peril. My name is Daniel Ironforge, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. Most folks call me Dan. I grew up in these West Virginia mountains, son of a coal miner who died of black lung when I was 16. That's why I chose the Forest Service instead of going underground like my daddy and his daddy before him. December 1979 was the worst winter I'd ever seen in the Monongahela National Forest. Snow piled up 6 feet deep, and the temperature hadn't gotten above zero in 2 weeks. The falls at Blackwater were frozen solid, looking like giant white teeth hanging from the cliff face. I was checking the trails near the old Kempton mine when the call came in on my radio. 3 cross-country skiers had gone missing 2 days ago. Their car was still parked at the trailhead, keys inside, engine frozen solid. "Dan, we need you to check the mine area," said Sheriff Williams. His voice crackled through the static. "Last place they were seen was heading toward those old shafts." I knew those mines. My grandfather had worked there before the big cave-in of 1923. 47 men died that day, and they never found all the bodies. The company just sealed it up and walked away like they always did back then. The hike took me 2 hours through knee-deep snow. My breath made white clouds that froze on my beard. I had my emergency pack, rope, headlamp, and the metal detector we used to find lost hikers. Everything a ranger needs for a winter rescue. But when I got to the mine entrance, something felt wrong. The old wooden boards that covered the shaft had been ripped apart from the inside. Splinters of wood, some as big as fence posts, were scattered across the snow like matchsticks. Whatever did this was strong. Real strong. I clicked on my headlamp and looked closer. That's when I saw the marks. Claw marks. 4 parallel scratches gouged deep into the oak tree next to the mine entrance. The tree was old, maybe 200 years, and thick as a truck. Those marks were 15 feet off the ground. No bear I knew could reach that high. No bear could tear apart those mine boards either. The wood was old but thick, reinforced with iron bars. I got out my radio. "Sheriff, this is Dan. I'm at the Kempton mine. We might have a bigger problem than missing skiers." Static answered me. I tried again. Nothing. The sun was getting low and the temperature was dropping fast. I had maybe an hour of light left. I should have turned back, but those 3 skiers were out there somewhere. Maybe hurt, maybe freezing to death. I pulled out my metal detector and turned it on. The thing went crazy, beeping and clicking like a Geiger counter in a uranium mine. I turned it off and tried again. Same thing. My compass was spinning too, the needle turning in slow circles like it couldn't find magnetic north. Both instruments worked fine on the hike up. I walked around the mine entrance looking for tracks in the snow. Fresh powder had fallen the night before, so any tracks should show up clear. But there was nothing. No animal prints, no boot prints, nothing. It was like whatever came out of that mine just floated over the snow. The air felt different here too. Warmer. Even though it was below zero everywhere else, I could feel heat coming from the mine shaft. Not hot, just less cold. Like something big and warm was breathing down there in the dark. I called out, "Hello? Anyone down there? This is Park Ranger Iron Forge." My voice echoed down the shaft and disappeared. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence and the whistle of wind through the trees. Then something called back. Not words exactly, but a sound like a voice. Deep and rough. Like someone trying to talk with a mouthful of gravel. It came from way down in the mine. So far down the echo took forever to reach me. I should have left right then. Should have hiked back to my truck and called for backup. But those skiers were missing, and I'd taken an oath to protect people in these woods. I checked my equipment one more time. Headlamp working, extra batteries, rope, first aid kit, emergency radio. I had everything I needed for a simple search and rescue. What I didn't have was any idea what I was about to find down there in the dark. I tied my rope to the oak tree and started down into the mine shaft. My headlamp cut through the darkness, showing old wooden support beams and rusted rail tracks from when they used to cart coal out of here. The air got warmer as I went deeper. Not comfortable warm, but thick and heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. There was a smell, too. Not just the musty smell of old mines, but something else. Something that reminded me of the morgue where they took my daddy after he died. 50 feet down, I found the first piece of evidence. A red wool mitten, the kind city folks wear skiing. It was caught on a broken piece of rail, and when I touched it, the wool was still damp, fresh. "Hello," I called out again. "Can anyone hear me?" This time the answer came faster. That same gravelly sound, but closer now. And there were words in it, just hard to make out, like someone talking underwater. I kept going deeper. The mine tunnel branched off in different directions, but the main shaft kept going down at a steep angle. My rope was running out. I had maybe 100 feet left. That's when I saw the light. Not electric light, but a soft orange glow coming from somewhere up ahead. It flickered like firelight, casting dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. I turned off my headlamp and let my eyes adjust. The glow was coming from around a bend in the tunnel, maybe 50 yards ahead. I could hear something too, a wet, sliding sound like someone dragging a heavy sack across the ground. I should have turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. But I thought about those 3 skiers, maybe hurt and scared, waiting for someone to help them. I kept my headlamp off and felt my way along the tunnel wall. The wood was slick with moisture, and more than once my hand came away sticky with something that wasn't water. When I reached the bend, I got down on my belly and peeked around the corner. The tunnel opened up into a bigger chamber, maybe an old mining room where they used to dig out coal. The orange glow was coming from chunks of something embedded in the walls. Not coal, but something that glowed like dying embers. And in the middle of the chamber, I saw her, Dr. Jennifer Colespur, the wildlife biologist who'd come up from the university to check on reports of a bear in the mine. She was sitting with her back against the wall, still alive but not moving much. Her winter coat was torn, and there was blood on her face. "Jennifer," I whispered as loud as I dared. She turned toward me, and I saw her eyes were wide with terror. She tried to say something, but only a croak came out. That's when I noticed she wasn't alone. Something big was moving in the shadows at the far end of the chamber. Something that walked upright like a man, but was too tall, too wide. The orange glow caught pieces of it. A massive arm covered in what looked like coal dust, fingers that ended in claws as long as railroad spikes. It was dragging something. Another person, maybe one of the skiers, but this one wasn't moving at all. I reached slowly for my radio, but my hand froze when the thing turned toward me. Eyes, glowing orange eyes like hot coals staring right at me through the darkness. It knew I was there. The thing opened its mouth and made that gravelly sound again. But this time I could understand some of the words. Mine, mine, mine. Not like it was claiming ownership, like it was saying the word mine, the place where men dig coal from the earth. I don't remember making the decision to run. 1 second I was staring into those burning eyes, the next I was scrambling back up the tunnel as fast as I could move. Behind me I heard Jennifer scream, and then that terrible, sliding sound getting closer. My hands shook so bad I could barely grip my rope. The thing was following me up the shaft. I could hear it moving through the tunnels, not climbing like I was, but walking up the steep slope like it was level ground. I reached the mine entrance just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The forest was dark now, and suddenly the mine shaft didn't seem like the most dangerous place to be. Because if that thing could walk up a near vertical tunnel like it was nothing, what was going to stop it from coming out into the woods? I ran for my truck, crashing through the snow, not caring about the noise I was making. My radio still wouldn't work, and my truck was 2 miles away through the dark forest. Behind me, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Deep, echoing laughter coming from the mine shaft. And underneath it, voices. Lots of voices, all talking at once in that same gravelly tone. Mine, mine, mine. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. Sheriff Williams was waiting for me with Tommy Steelrock, another ranger, and Bill Goldstream, our park superintendent. "What did you find out there, Dan?" Bill asked. He was a big man with gray hair and the kind of calm voice that usually made me feel better. "Not tonight," I told them everything. The torn boards, the claw marks, the heat coming from the mine. Jennifer sitting in that chamber with the thing in the shadows, the orange glow in those burning eyes. Tommy whistled low. "Sounds like a bear, all right. Big one that's made itself at home in the mine." "Bears don't tear apart reinforced timber," I said. "And they don't laugh." Sheriff Williams frowned. "You sure about what you heard, Dan? Mines play tricks with sound. Echo can make anything sound like voices." "I know. What I heard." I pulled out the red mitten I'd found. "This belongs to one of the missing skiers. Jennifer's down there, and she's hurt. We need to get her out." Bill nodded. "All right. We'll go in with proper equipment this time. Floodlights, more rope, medical supplies. First thing in the morning." "We can't wait that long," I said. "Jennifer won't last another night down there." "It's too dangerous in the dark," Bill said. "Whatever's in that mine, we need to see it coming." But I was already thinking about Jennifer's terrified eyes, about the thing dragging one of the skiers deeper into the mine. "I'm going back tonight, with or without you." Tommy stepped up. "I'll go with you. Been wanting to see this mine anyway. My great-uncle died in the cave-in there." Sheriff Williams didn't like it, but he gave us his biggest flashlights and a shotgun loaded with deer slugs. "You see anything that doesn't look right, you get out of there. No heroics." We drove back to the mine in Tommy's truck. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, and our breath fogged the windows. Tommy was quiet most of the way, but when we got close to the trailhead, he finally spoke up. "My great-uncle used to tell stories about that mine," he said. "Said there were places down there where the coal seam went deeper than anyone thought. Company didn't care, long as they kept pulling black gold out of the ground." "What happened the day of the cave-in?" I asked. "Nobody knows for sure. 47 men went down that morning. Only 3 came back up, and they were so scared they wouldn't talk about it. Company said it was a gas explosion, but..." He shrugged. "There were stories." "What kind of stories?" "The kind you don't tell unless you want folks thinking you're crazy." We parked and hiked back to the mine. This time we brought heavy-duty floodlights that plugged into a portable generator. If there was something down there, we were going to see it. The mine entrance looked even worse in the bright light. The wooden boards hadn't just been torn apart. They'd been shredded, like someone had taken a giant can opener to them, and the claw marks on the oak tree went all the way around the trunk. "Jesus," Tommy whispered. "What kind of bear does that?" I didn't answer because I was looking at something else. Footprints in the snow around the mine entrance. Not animal tracks. Boot prints. Fresh ones. "Someone else has been here," I said. Tommy knelt down and studied the tracks. "These are big. Size 13, maybe 14, and look at this." He pointed to one clear print. The sole pattern. "These are mining boots. Steel toes." We looked at each other. Mining boots hadn't been made like that since the 1920s. Tommy set up the generator and aimed the floodlights down the mine shaft. The beams cut through the darkness like white swords, showing us the tunnel going down into the earth. "Jennifer," I called, "can you hear me?" This time the answer came immediately. But it wasn't Jennifer's voice. "Get out." The words echoed up from the depths of the mine, spoken in that gravelly tone I'd heard before. But now I could tell there was more than one voice speaking. A lot more. "Get out. Now." Tommy had gone pale. "Dan, maybe we should listen to them." But before I could answer, we heard Jennifer's voice, weak and scared. "Help me. Please. It's got the others." That settled it. We tied off our ropes and started down. The floodlights from above lit up the first 100 feet of tunnel, but after that we were back to headlamps and shadows. The air got thicker as we descended, and that warm, wet smell got stronger. Tommy was breathing hard. "Something's wrong with the air down here," he gasped. "Feels like coal dust." That's when I realized what the smell was. Not just death. Coal. Lots of it. Like someone had been mining down here recently. We found more evidence as we went deeper. Pieces of torn clothing hanging from the support beams. Kipol, bent in half. And scratched into the wooden walls, messages carved with something sharp. "Help us. Can't get out." Something in the deep. The handwriting looked old. Really old. We reached the chamber where I'd seen Jennifer, but it was empty now. Our lights showed drag marks in the coal dust on the floor, leading deeper into the mine. "They moved her," I said. "We have to keep going." The tunnel kept sloping downward, branching into smaller passages. We followed the drag marks, calling Jennifer's name. And all the time, we could hear voices in the distance. Not just one or two, dozens of them, all whispering the same words over and over. "Mine, mine, mine." That's when we found Bill. Park Superintendent Bill Goldstream was hanging from a support beam 50 feet ahead of us, suspended by what looked like thick wire. His eyes were open but not seeing anything. There were claw marks across his chest, deep ones that had torn through his winter coat like it was paper. "Oh, God," Tommy whispered. "When did he get here?" I looked at my watch. We'd left Bill at the ranger station 2 hours ago. There was no way he could have beaten us here, gone deeper into the mine, and... That's when Bill opened his eyes and looked right at us. "Run," he croaked. His voice was barely human. "It's not just one. There's dozens of them down here, and they're hungry." From somewhere in the darkness behind us came a sound like metal scraping against rock, getting closer. "The main tunnel's blocked," Bill gasped. "They herded you down here. Only way out is through the deep shaft." "What deep shaft?" I asked, but Bill's head had dropped again. Tommy grabbed my arm. Dan, we need to go, now. The scraping sound was getting louder, and with it came that chorus of voices no longer whispering, "Mine, mine, mine." We ran deeper into the tunnel, our lights bouncing crazily as we stumbled, yet over broken rail tracks and chunks of fallen rock. Behind us, I could hear them coming, not just footsteps, but the sound of claws on stone, heavy breathing, and always those voices, chanting like some kind of prayer. The tunnel ended at a vertical shaft that dropped away into blackness. Our lights couldn't find the bottom. "This is it," Tommy panted. "The deep shaft Bill was talking about." I looked back. Orange light was flickering in the tunnel behind us, getting brighter. They were almost here. "We have to jump," I said. Tommy stared at me. "You're crazy." But the alternative was facing whatever was coming up that tunnel, and from the sound of it, there were a lot of them. "On 3, I said, and grabbed Tommy's hand. 1, 2. Something roared in the tunnel behind us, so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. 3! We jumped into the darkness, our lights spinning as we fell, showing us glimpses of rock walls and metal rails and things that glowed with orange light. And all the way down, we could hear them laughing. We hit water after falling maybe 30 feet. Cold black water that tasted like metal and coal dust. Our lights were waterproof, thank God, and when we surfaced, we found ourselves in an underground lake. "Where are we?" Tommy gasped, treading water. I shone my light around. We were in a huge cavern, bigger than anything that should exist under the mountain. The walls were covered with that same orange glowing stuff I'd seen before, giving everything a hellish light. And carved into the walls, hundreds of names and dates, all from the 1920s. "It's them," Tommy whispered. "The miners who died in the cave-in." But these weren't just names. Next to each one was carved how they died. Crushed, buried alive, starved, suffocated. In the center of the cavern was a small island of rock and coal. We swam toward it, and that's where we found Jennifer. She was alive, but barely conscious. Her lips were blue with cold, and when she tried to talk, only whispers came out. But she managed to point toward the far side of the cavern. That's where they were waiting for us. Dozens of them. Men, or what had once been men. They stood in the orange glow like statues, covered in coal dust and wearing the torn remains of mining clothes from 50 years ago. Their eyes burned with that same orange light. But they weren't zombies or ghosts. They were something else. Something that had been changed by decades of anger and pain and being forgotten. The largest one stepped forward. He must have been 7 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks and fingers that ended in claws made of twisted metal. When he spoke, his voice was like rocks falling. "You came into our mine." "We're here to help," I said, "to get the injured people out." He laughed, and the sound echoed through the cavern. "Help? Like they helped us? Like the company helped us when the tunnel collapsed?" "That was 50 years ago," Tommy said. "We weren't even born then." "Time doesn't matter down here," the creature said. "Pain doesn't fade. Anger doesn't die. We've been waiting for someone to pay for what happened to us." "We're not the ones who did this to you," I said. "You work for them, the government, the same people who let the company seal us in here and pretend we never existed." His claws scraped against the rock. 47 men died in this mine. 47 families never knew what really happened, and nobody cared. I looked around at all the carved names. 47, exactly. "You're them, the miners who died in the cave-in." "We didn't die," he said. "We were murdered." The company knew the deep tunnels were unstable. They knew about the gas pockets. But coal prices were high, and they needed every ton they could dig. More of the creatures stepped forward. I could see their faces now in the orange light, and they were still human faces. Tired, angry, sad faces of men who'd been betrayed. "So when the tunnels collapsed, the big onage," he continued, "they didn't try to dig us out. They just sealed the entrance and told our families it was an accident. Said our bodies were too deep to recover. That's why you're doing this," I said, "taking people who come into the mine. We tried to warn them away, but they keep coming. Government people, scientists, tourists, all working for the same system that killed us and forgot us. Jennifer stirred and managed to whisper, "The others, the skiers, are they?" The creature's expression softened slightly. "The three who came skiing? They're safe. Scared, but safe. They had nothing to do with our deaths. We only take the ones who represent the system." "Then let us go," I said. "We're just doing our jobs, trying to help people." "Your job is to serve the government that covered up our murders," he said. "Your job is to keep people away from the truth." Tommy stepped forward. "My great-uncle died with you, Thomas Steelrock." Several of the creatures turned toward him. One of them, smaller than the others, moved closer. "Tommy?" the smaller creature said. "Little Tommy Steelrock?" "You're him," Tommy breathed. "Uncle Thomas." The creature that had been Thomas Steelrock reached out with a clawed hand and gently touched Tommy's face. "You look just like your father, like me, when I was alive. Uncle Thomas, you have to stop this. Killing people won't bring you peace." "Peace?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "There's no peace for us. We're trapped here by our anger, our need for justice. We can't rest until people know what really happened." That's when I understood. "You don't want revenge," I said to the big creature. "You want your story told." He stared at me with those burning eyes. "For 50 years, we've been forgotten. Our families think we died in an accident. The company that killed us got rich and moved on. Nobody knows we were murdered." "What if I told your story?" I asked. "What if I made sure people knew the truth about what happened here?" "You're just a park ranger," he said. "Who would listen to you?" "I know people. Reporters. Federal investigators. I can make them listen." The creature considered this, and for the first time, some of the rage faded from his eyes. "And if you fail? If you decide it's easier to keep quiet? Then you can come find me," I said. "I'll give you my word, and if I break it, I'll face the consequences." He was quiet for a long moment. Around the cavern, the other miners waited for his decision. "Thomas," he finally said to Tommy's uncle, "what do you think?" The smaller creature looked at Tommy. "He's family. Blood of my blood. If he says his friend will keep his word, then I believe him." "All right," the big miner said. "But there are conditions. You tell the whole truth. Not just that we died, but how we died. Who was responsible? Who covered it up?" "I will," I promised. "And you make sure our families know. The ones still alive. They deserve to know their fathers and brothers and sons didn't die because they were careless or unlucky." "I'll find them," I said. "All of them." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his torn mining coat and pulled out something that glowed with soft orange light. A piece of coal, but different from any coal I'd ever seen. "Take this," he said. "As long as you keep your promise, it will burn with clean light. But if you betray us..." The coal flared brighter, and I felt heat against my palm. "It will burn you from the inside out." I took the coal. It felt warm but not hot, and the light it gave off was somehow comforting. "Now go," he said. "Take your friends and get out of our mine. You have work to do." Getting out of the mine was easier than getting in. The creatures, the miners, knew every tunnel, every shaft, every way to the surface. They guided us through passages I'd never seen, past chambers filled with mining equipment from decades ago. When we finally emerged into the winter night, the stars looked brighter than I'd ever seen them. Jennifer was weak but walking, and the 3 missing skiers were waiting by our trucks, cold and scared but unharmed. "They just appeared," one of them told me. 3 men in old mining clothes. They said we had to leave the mine, that it wasn't safe. They walked us out through tunnels we'd never seen. I looked back at the mine entrance. The boards were back in place, whole and undamaged, like they'd never been torn apart. But I could still feel the warm coal in my pocket, proof that what happened down there was real. It took me 3 months to keep my promise. 3 months of digging through old company records, tracking down families, talking to federal investigators who didn't want to believe what I was telling them. But I had help. Tommy's Uncle Thomas appeared to him in dreams, giving him details about the company's safety violations, the names of supervisors who knew the tunnels were dangerous, the paperwork that proved the cover-up. And Jennifer, once she recovered, used her connections at the university to get geologists and mining experts to examine the site. They found evidence of deliberate negligence, proof that the company had cut corners on safety to maximize profits. The story broke in newspapers across the state. Federal prosecutors opened an investigation. The families of the 47 miners finally learned the truth about how their loved ones died. Some of the company executives were still alive. They were arrested and charged with criminally negligent homicide. It was too late for real justice, but it was something. I kept the piece of coal. It sits on my desk now, glowing softly in the dark, a reminder of my promise and the price of keeping it. I left the Forest Service after that, became a private investigator specializing in old mining accidents and industrial cover-ups. There are more cases than you might think, more families who never learned the truth about what happened to their relatives. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm working on a case, I feel them watching me. The miners from Blackwater Falls. Sure, I'm keeping my word. Tommy still works as a ranger, but he's different now. He says he can sense when mines are dangerous, when old tragedies are still trapped underground. He's prevented 3 cave-ins in the past 2 years, always knowing exactly where the weak spots are. Jennifer went back to her research, but she focuses on different things now. The environmental impact of abandoned mines, the way industrial trauma lingers in the land itself. She says the earth remembers every wound we inflict on it. And every December, on the anniversary of the cave-in, I drive back to Blackwater Falls. I bring flowers, not expensive ones, just wildflowers I pick from the mountain meadows. I leave them at the mine entrance, and I say the names of all 47 miners who died there. The coal in my pocket always glows a little brighter when I do. The mine entrance is sealed again now, welded shut by the federal investigators. But sometimes hikers report seeing lights moving deep underground and hearing voices echoing up from the depths. Mine. 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 Not claiming ownership this time, just reminding anyone who'll listen that they're still there, still waiting for justice, still making sure their story isn't forgotten. Because that's the thing about mountains and mines and places where people died angry. They remember everything, every slight, every betrayal, every life cut short by greed and negligence. And if you don't respect that memory, if you don't honor the dead, sooner or later they'll find a way to make you listen. So if you're ever hiking in the mountains of West Virginia and you come across an old mine shaft, take a moment to remember the men who died down there. Say their names if you know them. Leave a flower if you can. Because the earth is listening, the mountains are watching, and the dead are never really gone. They're just waiting underground. Making sure their stories don't die with them. My name is Rebecca Stormwind, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 8 years now, and let me tell you something. When a swimming hole has a name like Devil's Bathtub, you should probably stay away from it. But people don't listen. They never do. August 1985 was the hottest, driest summer I'd ever seen in Virginia. The creeks were running so low, you could walk across spots that used to be over your head. Devil's Bathtub, normally a deep swimming hole carved into the rock by thousands of years of rushing water, had dropped 3 feet. You could actually see the smooth stone bottom for the first time since I'd been working here. I remember thinking it was beautiful in a sad way, like seeing the bones of something that was supposed to stay hidden. Devil's Bathtub sits way back in Scott County, about a 2-mile hike from the nearest parking area. It's this natural pool carved right into the sandstone with a little waterfall feeding into it. On hot days, families would pack lunches and make the trek back there to swim and cool off. Kids loved jumping off the rocks into the deep water. Well, it used to be deep. I'd grown up in these mountains. graduated from Appalachian State with a degree in forestry, and thought I knew every story these hills had to tell. My grandmother used to warn me about certain places where the dead don't rest easy, but I figured that was just old mountain superstition. After 8 years of rescuing lost hikers, treating snake bites, and pulling the occasional drunk college kid out of a creek, I thought I'd seen it all. That morning started like any other. I was doing my regular patrol, checking the trails and making sure the reduced water levels weren't creating any new hazards. The air was thick and still, the kind of heat that makes your ranger uniform stick to your skin before 9 a.m. I had all my gear with me: swift water rescue equipment, emergency medical supplies, radio for calling in helicopter support if needed. I was certified in underwater rescue and had pulled more than a few people out of these mountain streams over the years. The water doesn't mess around out here. Even experienced swimmers can get in trouble when they don't respect the current. But that day, there wasn't much current to speak of. The creek was barely trickling. I was checking the safety barriers we'd installed around some of the deeper pools when I heard voices echoing off the rock walls. 3 college kids, 2 boys and a girl, had made it back to the bathtub with a cooler and some inner tubes. "Hey there," I called out, hiking down to meet them. "Y'all be careful in there. Water's a lot lower than usual." The girl, maybe 20 years old with long brown hair, waved at me. "We're good swimmers, don't worry." "I'm sure you are," I said, "but these rocks can be slippery and some of the drop-offs might be different than you expect." One of the boys, tall with sandy hair, laughed. "Come on, it's barely 4 feet deep now. What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words, as it turned out. I stayed nearby, doing some maintenance on the trail markers while keeping an ear out for any trouble. The 3 kids were having a good time, splashing around and floating on their tubes. Normal summer fun. Around noon, I heard the girl scream. I dropped my tools and ran toward the water. The girl was standing in the shallows, pointing at the middle of the pool. "They went under," she yelled. "They both just went under and haven't come up." I could see them down there through the clear, low water, maybe 4.5 feet deep at the most. Both boys were sitting on the bottom in what looked like, well, it looked like they were praying. Hands folded, heads bowed, perfectly still. I grabbed my rescue gear and dove in. The water hit me like a cold slap. Had to be at least 15 degrees colder than it should have been, even with the drought. But I didn't have time to think about that. I reached the first boy, the sandy-haired one who joked about the depth. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing me. He wasn't seeing anything. I grabbed him under the arms and pulled him to the surface, but I already knew it was too late. The other boy was the same way, peaceful, like he'd just decided to sit down underwater and stay there. I tried CPR on both of them while the girl sobbed on the rocks, but they were already gone. No water in their lungs, no signs of panic or struggle. They'd just stopped. In all my years of water rescue, I'd never seen anything like it. The investigation took 3 days. State police, county coroner, Park Service officials, they all came out to Devil's Bathtub to figure out how 2 strong swimmers drowned in 4 feet of water on a calm day. The girl, Sarah, told the same story over and over. They were fine 1 minute, swimming around, laughing. Then they just went quiet and sank down, like something called them down there. The coroner couldn't find any drugs in their systems, no alcohol, no medical conditions. Accidental drowning went on the death certificates, but nobody was satisfied with that explanation. I sure wasn't. I started coming back to Devil's Bathtub every day, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I brought underwater cameras, temperature sensors, pH test strips. I was determined to find some rational explanation. Maybe an underwater cave system creating a sudden current, or some kind of gas seepage that could cause disorientation, but the cameras kept malfunctioning. 3 different waterproof models, all failing in the same way. The images would start out clear, then get fuzzy, then just show static, like something was interfering with the electronics. And the temperature readings were all wrong. The air temperature was hitting 95 degrees every day, but that pool stayed cold. No, just cool. Cold enough to make your breath steam when you first went in. On the 4th day, I brought scuba gear. If there was something wrong with the bottom of that pool, I was going to find it. The water was crystal clear, so I could see everything as I descended. The smooth sandstone walls carved by centuries of rushing water, small fish darting between the rocks. And there, right where those boys had died, something that made my blood freeze. It was a ring, a wedding ring, old and tarnished, embedded in the rock like it had been there for decades. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. It was the fact that the rock around it was carved with letters. Deep, careful letters that spelled out, Elizabeth Morrison, beloved bride, 1863. I tried to pry the ring loose, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had grown into the stone itself. That night I drove into town to see Mrs. Hawkins, the local historian. If anyone would know about an Elizabeth Morrison from 1863, it would be her. "Oh, honey," she said when I mentioned the name, "that's a sad story. Elizabeth Morrison was supposed to marry young Thomas Whitfield on August 15, 1863, but the night before the wedding she went missing. They found her dress by Devil's Bathtub, but never found her body." "What happened to Thomas?" I asked. "Poor boy spent months searching for her. The story goes he believed she'd run off with someone else, but he never stopped looking. Eventually joined up with the Confederate Army and died at Gettysburg. Some folks say he died of a broken heart more than anything else." "Did they ever find out what really happened to Elizabeth?" Mrs. Hawkins shook her head. Mountain justice in those days wasn't always official. There were rumors that Thomas's brother James had been sweet on Elizabeth too. Some say he told her lies about Thomas to break up the wedding. Others say worse things happened, but without a body, it all stayed rumors. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that ring, embedded in the stone where two young men had died for no reason anyone could explain. The next morning, I got a call from my supervisor, Mark Ashford. A park volunteer named Danny had gone missing. His truck was found at the trailhead to Devil's Bathtub. We organized a search party. 12 rangers, state police officers, and volunteers spread out through the forest, calling Danny's name. But I had a sick feeling in my stomach about where we'd find him. I was right. He was in the pool, sitting on the bottom, just like those college boys. Same peaceful expression, same prayer-like position. But this time, there was something different. Danny was wearing a wedding suit. Not his clothes. He'd been wearing ranger gear when he disappeared. This was an old-fashioned black suit with a high collar, the kind men wore in the 1860s. And around his finger was a matching ring, identical to the one embedded in the stone. I dove down to get him, and when I touched his hand, I swear I heard something. A voice, faint and distant, singing what sounded like a wedding hymn. When I surfaced with Danny's body, Mark was staring at me with wide eyes. "Becca," he said quietly, "look at the water." I turned around, treading water with Danny in my arms, and felt my heart stop. Standing at the edge of the pool, wearing a soaked white wedding dress, was a woman. Her long dark hair hung down over her face, and her skin was pale as moonlight. She raised one hand and pointed directly at me. Then she opened her mouth and began to sing. The sound was beautiful and terrible all at once, like church bells mixed with a funeral dirge. I felt something tugging at my legs, trying to pull me down, and suddenly the water around me was spinning like a whirlpool. "Get out!" Mark shouted from the rocks. "Get out now!" I kicked as hard as I could, fighting against whatever was pulling me down, and somehow made it to the shallow water. But when I looked back, the woman was gone, and the ring on Danny's finger had disappeared too. Mark called in a federal dive team the next day. 6 professional divers from the FBI's Underwater Recovery Unit, equipped with the latest sonar and camera equipment. They were going to map every inch of Devil's Bathtub and figure out what was killing people. I tried to tell them about the woman I'd seen, but they looked at me like I'd been breathing too much tank air. "Stress hallucination," the team leader said, "happens all the time in recovery situations." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But when they went into the water, things started going wrong immediately. The first diver, a guy named Peterson, came up after 20 minutes babbling about the beautiful lady who wants to dance. His diving computer showed he'd been at 60 feet, which was impossible. Devil's Bathtub wasn't even 10 feet deep anymore. The second diver didn't come up at all. We waited an hour, then Mark and I suited up to go find him. The water was murky now, stirred up by all the activity, but we could see lights moving around on the bottom. When we got down there, we found him sitting cross-legged next to that carved stone, staring at nothing. His name was Agent Rodriguez, and he'd been diving for 15 years. Never had an accident, never panicked underwater, but he wouldn't respond to our signals, wouldn't even look at us. Just sat there like he was waiting for something. It took both of us to drag him to the surface, and when we got him out, he started speaking in a voice that wasn't his own. "She's so beautiful," he kept saying in an old-fashioned accent. "Elizabeth is the most beautiful bride in all of Virginia. I'm going to marry her tonight, and we'll be together forever." The medics sedated him and airlifted him to the hospital in Bristol, but before they loaded him into the helicopter, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Tell her I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes suddenly clear and terrified. "Tell Elizabeth I never meant to hurt her. James made me do it. James said if I couldn't have her, nobody could." Then he was gone, and I was left standing there with more questions than answers. That night, Mark and I stayed at the site to keep people away. We set up camp about 100 yards from the water, with floodlights pointed at the pool. Neither of us wanted to admit we were scared, but we both kept our weapons ready. Around midnight, the singing started. It was the same voice I'd heard underwater, but now it was coming from everywhere at once, echoing off the rock walls, seeming to rise from the pool itself. A wedding song in words I didn't recognize, but the melody was so sad it made my chest ache. "You hear that, right?" Mark asked quietly. "Yeah, I hear it." We grabbed our flashlights and moved toward the water. The pool was perfectly still, reflecting our lights like black glass. But as we got closer, we could see something moving underneath the surface. It was her. The woman in the wedding dress, walking along the bottom of the pool like she was strolling down the aisle of a church. Her dress flowed around her in the water, and her face was turned upward toward us. Even through the water, I could see her eyes, dark and full of a longing that was deeper than grief. She raised one hand and beckoned to Mark. "She's beautiful," he whispered, and I heard that same old-fashioned accent creeping into his voice. "Mark, no." I grabbed his arm as he started walking toward the water. "Don't look at her. Don't listen." But he shook me off with strength I didn't know he had. "She needs me, Becca. Elizabeth needs me. She's been waiting so long." He was waist-deep in the pool before I could stop him. The woman in white rose toward him, her arms outstretched, and for a moment they looked like any couple meeting for their first dance. Then she pulled him under. I dove in after them, but the water was black as ink now. I couldn't see anything, couldn't find them. I surfaced, gasping and panicking, and saw Mark floating face down 10 feet away. I hauled him out and started CPR, but he was already gone, and just like the others, he looked peaceful, content, like he'd found something he'd been searching for his whole life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found in his pocket, a wedding ring that matched the one carved into the stone. And when I looked at his face in the flashlight beam, I could swear his features had changed, becoming sharper, more angular, like he was slowly turning into someone else. As I sat there beside his body, waiting for dawn and wondering if I was going insane, I heard footsteps on the rocks behind me. I turned around, and she was there. Elizabeth Morrison, still wearing her soaked wedding dress, still beautiful and terrible and heartbreaking. But now she was standing on dry land, as solid and real as I was. "You took him from me," she said in a voice like distant thunder, "just like they all take my grooms from me." "I didn't take anyone," I managed to say. "I was trying to save him." She tilted her head, studying me with those dark, ancient eyes. "You're not a man." "No, I'm not." "Then why do you interfere? Why do you keep them from coming to me?" I stood up slowly, trying not to show how terrified I was. "Because you're killing people, innocent people who never did anything to hurt you." Elizabeth's face twisted with rage, and suddenly the air around us was full of swirling water, impossible amounts of water, more than the entire pool could hold. It formed a spinning wall around us, trapping me in the eye of a supernatural storm. Innocent? She screamed, and her voice made the rocks shake. Thomas was innocent too. I was innocent. But James Whitfield couldn't bear to see us happy, so he told Thomas I was unfaithful. He showed Thomas my body after he killed me and made it look like I'd drowned myself in shame. The water pressed closer, and I could barely breathe. That was over 100 years ago, Elizabeth. These people had nothing to do with what happened to you. They're all the same, she cried. Men who promise love and deliver betrayal. Men who take what they want and leave women to die alone and forgotten. But I won't be forgotten anymore. I'll have my wedding, and my grooms will stay with me forever. I understood then. She wasn't just killing random people. She was collecting them, building herself an eternal wedding party where no one could ever leave her again. And now she was looking at me like I was the next problem to solve. The water wall collapsed, dropping me to my knees on the wet rocks. Elizabeth stood over me, her wedding dress dripping with century-old creek water, her face beautiful and terrible in the moonlight. You've seen too much, she said. You know too much. I can't let you leave. I scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The pool was behind me, the rock walls to either side. Elizabeth raised her hands, and I felt water rising around my ankles, then my knees, then my waist. Impossible amounts of water appearing from nowhere. Wait, I gasped. Elizabeth, wait. I know what really happened to you. She paused, her head tilted like a curious bird. You know nothing. I know James Whitfield killed you. I know he convinced Thomas you were unfaithful so he could have you for himself. And when you refused him, he murdered you and made it look like suicide. Her eyes narrowed. Thomas believed his lies. My own beloved believed I was a whore. Because James showed him your body and lied about finding you with another man. Thomas never stopped loving you, Elizabeth. He spent months searching for you. And when he couldn't find your killer, he died of grief. Lies, she whispered. But I could see doubt in her face. Mrs. Hawkins told me the story. Thomas joined the army and died at Gettysburg, but the other soldiers said he called your name with his last breath. He never believed you rayed him. He just couldn't prove James was lying. The water around me stopped rising, and Elizabeth's form flickered like she was having trouble staying solid. He called my name? Yes. And James? James lived to be an old man, but he never married, never had children. The guilt ate him alive, Elizabeth. He got his punishment. She was crying now, tears mixing with the creek water that constantly dripped from her hair. I waited so long for Thomas to come to me. I thought if I could find men to take his place, the loneliness would stop. But it never stops. Because they weren't Thomas, I said gently. And Thomas isn't coming, Elizabeth. He's been dead for over a century. You need to let go. I can't. Her voice was small and broken now. If I let go, I'll be alone forever. At least with my grooms, I have someone to dance with at my wedding. You don't have to be alone. Thomas is waiting for you on the other side, but you can't reach him while you're tied to this place by anger and grief. The water around us was receding now, sinking back into the pool where it belonged. Elizabeth's form was getting dimmer, like she was fading away. How do you know? She asked. How do you know he's waiting? I thought about the ring embedded in the stone, about the way Danny had been dressed in old-fashioned clothes, about Agent Rodriguez speaking in Thomas's voice. Because he keeps trying to come to you, I realized. Every man you pull into that water, he tries to use them to reach you, but you're so angry, so hurt that you can't see him. Elizabeth's eyes widened, and she looked down at the pool with new understanding. The ring in the stone. That was his ring. His wedding ring. He must have thrown it in the water when he thought you'd betrayed him. But it sank right to the spot where you died, Elizabeth. Even in his anger, his love was stronger. She walked to the edge of the pool and stared down at the carved stone that had been her grave marker for so long. He's really there? Thomas is really trying to reach me? I think so. But first, you have to forgive him for believing James's lies. And you have to forgive yourself for dying angry." Elizabeth turned back to me, and for the first time, she looked like what she really was. A young woman who'd died before her time, scared and alone and desperate for the love she'd been cheated out of. "Will you help me?" she asked. "I don't know how to let go. I've been holding on so long I don't remember how to let go." "Yes," I said. "I'll help you." She smiled then, and it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I'd ever seen. "Thank you, Rebecca Stormwind. You have a kind heart." The water in the pool began to glow with soft, golden light. Elizabeth walked into it, her wedding dress trailing behind her, and as she reached the center, where that ring was embedded in the stone, she began to sing again. But this time, it wasn't a lament. It was a love song. And from deep in the water, I heard another voice join hers, a man's voice, strong and clear and full of joy. The harmonies they created together were so beautiful I had to sit down on the rocks and just listen. The light grew brighter, and I saw two figures in the water now, Elizabeth in her white dress, and a young man in a blue Civil War uniform. They were dancing together in the golden light, turning slowly in each other's arms like they had all the time in the world. They looked up at me one last time, both of them smiling, and then the light faded. The pool was just a pool again. Normal temperature, normal depth, normal Mountain Creek water. But the ring was gone from the stone, and carved in its place were two names, Elizabeth Morrison Whitfield, Thomas Whitfield, united in love, 1863 to 1985. I stayed at Devil's Bathtub until sunrise, making sure Elizabeth and Thomas were really gone. The water felt normal now, cool but not cold, clear but not supernatural. Just a pretty swimming hole in the Jefferson National Forest. When the other rangers arrived with the coroner and investigators, I told them Mark had suffered an equipment malfunction during the dive. It wasn't exactly a lie. His equipment had definitely malfunctioned. They didn't need to know it was because a Civil War ghost had been trying to marry him. Rodriguez recovered completely, with no memory of his time underwater. The official report blamed his behavior on nitrogen narcosis, and he was quietly transferred to a desk job. Sometimes the government is good at covering up things that don't fit the official version of reality. I requested a transfer too, but not away from the mountains. I asked to be put in charge of historical site management for the entire Jefferson National Forest. If Elizabeth and Thomas had been trapped here for over a century, there might be others. These mountains had seen a lot of death over the years. Civil War battles, mining accidents, family feuds that turned deadly. The dead don't always rest easy in Appalachia. Sometimes they need help finding their way home. I've been back to Devil's Bathtub dozens of times since that night in August. It's a popular swimming spot again. Families bring their kids, teenagers come to jump off the rocks, couples have picnics by the water. The place feels different now, peaceful, like a weight has been lifted from it. But I keep a memorial there, just in case. 2 small wreaths of mountain laurel placed on the stone where Elizabeth and Thomas finally found each other. I replace them every few months, and sometimes I sit by the water and tell them about the people who come to swim in their pool. I think they like knowing their resting place brings joy instead of sorrow now. Mark's death was ruled an accidental drowning, and his family held a beautiful service for him. I didn't tell them he'd died trying to save a woman who'd been murdered over 100 years ago. Some truths are too strange for civilian ears. But late at night, when I'm alone in my ranger station filing reports and updating trail maps, I sometimes think about the other places in these mountains where the past refuses to stay buried. The old mining camps where accidents happened and men died far from home. The battlefields where soldiers fell and never got proper burials. The hidden hollows where family secrets turned into family tragedies. There are more stories out there, waiting to be told. More spirits who need someone to listen to them, to help them find peace. And if 8 years as a park ranger has taught me anything, it's that the mountains don't give up their secrets easily. But they do give them up eventually. To the right person, at the right time, with the right kind of patience. My name is Rebecca Stormwind, And I've learned that sometimes the most important part of a ranger's job isn't protecting people from the wilderness. Sometimes it's protecting the wilderness from the people who died angry in it. And sometimes, if you're very careful and very lucky, you can help the angry ones find their way to peace. Just remember, if you're ever hiking in Jefferson National Forest and you come across a swimming hole with a name like Devil's Bathtub, maybe think twice before diving in. The water might be deeper than it looks, and you never know who might be waiting at the bottom. My name is Marcus Eagleclaw, but everyone just calls me Mac. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, working these mountains in North Carolina. Some folks think it's because I'm part Cherokee that I understand these hills better than most. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. What I know for sure is that some places in these mountains collect evil like a magnet. Raven Rock Overlook sits at mile marker 239 on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Most tourists stop there for maybe 10 minutes, snap a few pictures of the valley below, then move on. They don't know the history. They don't know why the ravens gather there in huge, silent flocks. They don't know why the Cherokee used to call it the place where heads roll uphill. I never believed those old stories. Not until November of 1973. The weather had turned bad that week. Thick fog rolled through the mountains every morning and stayed until afternoon. Temperature inversions made everything feel wrong. Too warm at the top of ridges, too cold in the valleys. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet on some days. Tourist season was winding down, which meant fewer people but more problems. The ones who came up weren't prepared for mountain weather. That Tuesday morning I was checking the overlook when I found Mrs. Patterson from Ohio crying by her station wagon. Her husband was trying to comfort her, but she kept shaking her head and pointing at their camera. "What's the problem, ma'am?" I asked, adjusting my ranger hat against the drizzle. She handed me their Polaroid pictures with trembling hands. "Look at the third one," she whispered. "Tell me what you see." The first two photos showed their family, husband, wife, 2 kids, smiling in front of the scenic view. Normal vacation pictures. But the third one made my stomach drop. There, floating in the background behind their heads, was a human skull. Clear as day. Grinning. No empty eye sockets, staring right at the camera. "Must be a problem with the film," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. I'd seen enough Polaroids to know they don't malfunction like that. Mr. Patterson shook his head. "We took 6 pictures. Same thing in 3 of them. Always that thing, floating behind us." I looked around the overlook. Nothing but fog and silence. Even the ravens that usually crowded the trees were gone. "Did you see anything when you took the pictures?" I asked. "Nothing," Mrs. Patterson said. "We would have run if we'd seen that thing." I took down their information and promised to file a report, standard procedure for unusual incidents. But as I watched their car disappear into the fog, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That afternoon, I drove up to see Thomas Crow Feather, an elder from the Cherokee Reservation. Thomas was 83 and still sharp as a knife. If anyone knew the real history of Raven Rock, it would be him. His cabin sat in a clearing about 5 miles from the parkway. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and his old hound dog barely lifted its head when I parked. "Mac," Thomas said before I could knock, "you look troubled. Need to ask you about Raven Rock, Thomas. The old stories." His face went serious. He poured coffee and sat across from me at his kitchen table. "Which stories?" I told him about the photographs, about the skull, about the strange feeling that had been growing in my gut all day. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke in Cherokee first, then English. "That place, it was used for executions. 3 different times in history. Cherokee traders during the old days. Then white men used it during Reconstruction for lynchings. Always the same method. Throw them off the cliff, let them fall on the rocks below." "But why do people see skulls?" "Because they never found peace," Thomas said simply. "Too much anger, too much pain. The spirits stay trapped, looking for justice." I wanted to laugh it off. I really did. But something in the old man's Eyes stopped me. What do the spirits want? I asked. Recognition, truth. The white history books don't talk about what happened there. Tourists come and take happy pictures, never knowing they're standing on a place of suffering. Driving back to the ranger station, I couldn't get Thomas's words out of my head. I'd always prided myself on being practical. Mountain rescue, first aid, dealing with drunk campers. Those were real problems with real solutions. This felt different. This felt like something that couldn't be fixed with rope and radio calls. But I was about to learn that some problems don't care whether you believe in them or not. The next morning brought 3 more incident reports. A family from Virginia saw a skull in their pictures. A couple from Tennessee heard screaming coming from the empty air above the overlook. An old man from Georgia claimed something pushed his granddaughter, but there was nobody around. I decided to spend the day at Raven Rock, observing. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe someone was playing pranks. Maybe the fog was creating optical illusions. I arrived just after sunrise. The fog was thick enough to cut with a knife. My boots echoed on the wet pavement as I walked to the stone barrier that separated tourists from the cliff edge. That's when I saw it. 40 feet up the sheer rock face, embedded in solid stone, was a human skull. Not sitting on a ledge, not wedged in a crack. Embedded, like it had been there when the mountain formed. I blinked hard and looked again. Still there. I got my climbing gear from the truck. Rope, harness, carabiners, everything I needed for a technical rescue. If there was a skull up there, I was going to find out how it got there. The climb took 20 minutes. My hands were numb from the cold, and the fog made it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. When I finally reached Tunun, his skull, my heart nearly stopped. It was definitely human. Old, weathered by decades of mountain weather. But there were marks on it, deep gouges that looked like axe cuts. Rope burns around the base where a neck would be. More disturbing was how it sat in the rock, not resting against it, not wedged into a natural crack. The stone seemed to have grown around it, like the skull had always been part of the mountain. I tried to pull it free. My fingers passed right through it. I jerked my hand back so fast I almost lost my grip on the rope. The skull was solid enough to see, solid enough to cast a shadow, but my fingers went through it like it was made of mist. That's when I heard the screaming. It started low, like wind through tree branches. Then it got louder, angrier. It was coming from the skull, but also from the rocks around me, from the fog itself. Words I recognized. Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me years ago. Galvquohi, murderer, Unolisvi, justice, envy, blood. The screaming got so loud I had to cover my ears. My radio started crackling with static. The fog swirled around me like it was alive. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Even my own breathing seemed muffled. I rappelled down faster than I should have, packed my gear, and drove straight back to the station. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely fill out the incident report. But I'm a professional. I've seen people die in these mountains. I've pulled bodies out of ravines and called parents to tell them their kids weren't coming home. I don't scare easy, so why couldn't I stop thinking about that skull? That evening, I called Dr. Sarah Bonecrusher at the university. She was an anthropologist who specialized in Cherokee history and had helped the Park Service with cultural sites before. If anyone could explain what I'd seen, it would be her. "Mac, you sound terrible," she said when I described the skull. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "I know how it sounds, Sarah, but I need you to come up here. Bring whatever equipment you need to document this properly. I can be there tomorrow morning. But Mac, be careful up there. Some places hold on to trauma longer than others." She hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense that something very bad was about to happen. I should have listened to that feeling. The next morning, I met Sarah at the overlook. She brought cameras, measuring tools, and a digital recorder for documenting oral histories. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the kind of sharp intelligence that made grown men step aside when she was working. "Show me," she said simply. We climbed up together. Sarah was a better climber than I expected, moving up the rock face like she'd done it her whole life. When we reached the skull, she went completely still. "My God," she whispered. "Mac, this isn't possible." She tried to touch it, just like I had. Her hand passed right through. "How old do you think it is?" I asked. Sarah pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the bone structure. Male, probably in his 20s when he died. These cut marks. Mac, someone took an axe to this man's head, multiple times. Thomas Crow Feather said this was an execution site, 3 different periods in history. He's right. Sarah was taking pictures from every angle. Cherokee justice was usually more humane. But for traitors, for those who betrayed the tribe to white authorities, sometimes they used white man's justice. Brutal justice. That's when we heard voices below us. Tourists had arrived, a family with 2 young kids setting up for pictures at the scenic overlook. "We should warn them," Sarah said. But before we could start rappelling down, the screaming started again. This time it was worse, louder, angrier. The fog swirled around us like a tornado, and I could feel the rock face vibrating under my hands. Below us, the Fey. Millie started screaming too. The kids were crying. The father was shouting something about getting to the car. Then I heard the sound of breaking glass. By the time we got down, the family's car windows were shattered. All of them, from the inside out. Glass covered the ground like deadly snow, but there was nobody near the car who could have broken them. The mother was holding her bleeding daughter. The father was trying to use his cell phone, but the electronic devices weren't working. Nothing was working. "Get them out of here," Sarah said. "Now." I helped load the family into my Park Service truck while Sarah gathered her equipment. As we drove away, I looked back at the overlook. Through the fog, I could see shapes moving. Dark shapes that looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Too tall. Moving in ways that hurt to watch. And I could hear more screaming. Not just one voice now, dozens of voices all crying out in rage and pain. "What have we awakened?" Sarah whispered. I didn't have an answer. But I was starting to understand that some questions are better left unasked. Word spread fast through the mountains. By evening, I had 15 incident reports on my desk. Hikers seeing skulls floating in the trees. Campers hearing voices speaking Cherokee in the middle of the night. 3 separate car accidents near the overlook, all involving shattered windshields and drivers claiming something appeared in front of their vehicles. The park superintendent called an emergency meeting. "Mac, I need to know what's happening up there," Superintendent Williams said. He was a good man, but he'd spent most of his career dealing with budget reports and political problems, not supernatural incidents. "Honestly, sir, I don't know. But it's getting worse." Sarah had set up a temporary research station in the visitor center. She'd brought in ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic, field detectors, and audio recording equipment. What she found wasn't comforting. "There are at least 12 bodies buried in the rocks around that overlook," she told us. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, and the audio equipment is picking up voices speaking Cherokee dialects that haven't been used in over 100 years. "Bodies in the rocks?" Williams asked. "Not just buried under them, in them. Somehow the bones have become part of the stone itself." I thought about the skull I'd seen, embedded in solid rock. "How is that possible?" "It's not," Sarah said simply. "At least it shouldn't be. But trauma can do strange things to a place, especially violent trauma that's never been acknowledged or addressed." That's when Deputy Sheriff Carol Running Bear arrived. Carol was Cherokee, about my age, and one of the toughest people I knew. If she was here, it meant the situation had gotten official attention. "Mac, we've got a problem," she said. "State police are asking questions about the accidents. They want to close the overlook until we can figure out what's causing people to crash." "Good," I said. "Maybe that'll keep folks safe." Carol shook her head. "You don't understand. Closing it might make things worse. My grandmother says angry spirits get stronger when they're ignored. They need to be acknowledged, not avoided. "What do you suggest?" Williams asked. "Let me talk to the tribal council. Maybe we can find a way to put these spirits to rest." But we were out of time. The next morning, a search and rescue team found Dr. Sarah Bonecrusher's body at the bottom of the cliff below Raven Rock. Her neck was broken, but that wasn't what made the rescue workers sick. Her head had been twisted completely around. She was facing backward, her eyes wide open in an expression of absolute terror, and she was holding her digital recorder. When I played back the recording, my blood turned to ice. Sarah's voice, calm and professional at first. "November 15th, 3:30 a.m. I'm investigating electromagnetic disturbances at the Raven Rock site. The fog is particularly thick tonight, and I'm getting readings that don't make sense." Then her voice changed. Got scared. "Something's moving in the fog. Multiple shapes. Oh God, they're not human. Not anymore. The heads are floating separate from the bodies. Static. Screaming. Sarah's voice again, but desperate now. They're surrounding me. 12 of them. Skulls floating in the air, all talking at once. They're saying they want justice. They want people to know what happened here. They want..." More static. Then Sarah screaming. Then a voice that wasn't Sarah's. A man's voice, speaking Cherokee. Then silence. The recording ran for another 10 minutes, but there was nothing except the sound of wind. I called Thomas Crowfeather immediately. "They killed her," I said. "The spirits. They killed Sarah." "No," Thomas said quietly. "They made her join them. She's part of the mountain now, Mac. Part of their story. How do we stop this?" "You can't stop it. You can only finish it." "What does that mean?" "The spirits want 3 things: recognition of what happened, truth about the executions, and proper burial rites for the victims. Until they get all 3, they'll keep killing." "But Sarah was trying to help them. She was documenting everything." "Doesn't matter. They're too angry to tell friend from enemy. They see anyone in authority, Park Service, police, government, as part of the system that murdered them and then forgot they existed." That afternoon, more people died. A state trooper investigating the accidents found himself surrounded by floating skulls on the overlook. His body was discovered the next morning, positioned exactly like Sarah's. Head twisted around, eyes wide with terror. A news crew from Asheville came to film a story about the mysterious accidents. Their van went off the road, just below the overlook. The reporter and cameraman survived, but they both swore they saw human skulls bouncing off their windshield like hailstones. By evening, we had the overlook, cordoned off with police tape. But that didn't stop the spirits. Campers at sites 5 miles away reported seeing skull-shaped lights floating through the trees. Hikers on other sections of the parkway heard Cherokee war chants echoing from empty valleys. Even the animals were acting strange. Dogs wouldn't stop howling, horses refused to go near certain trails, and the ravens had completely disappeared from a 50-mile radius. "It's spreading," Carol Running Bear told me. "Whatever's happening at Raven Rock is affecting the whole mountain." I knew she was right, and I knew that if we didn't do something soon, more people were going to die. That night, I made a decision that would either save lives or cost me my own. I was going back to Raven Rock, alone, to face whatever was up there and try to end this nightmare. As I loaded my gear, rope, first aid kit, emergency radio, and Thomas Crowfeather's sacred tobacco for offerings, I thought about Sarah, about the state trooper, about all the people who had died because angry spirits couldn't tell the difference between enemies and allies. Maybe I could make them understand. Maybe my Cherokee blood would help me communicate with them in a way Sarah couldn't. Or maybe I'd end up with my head twisted around, staring backward at a world I'd never see again. But I had to try. It was my job to protect people in these mountains, even if it meant protecting them from the mountains themselves. I arrived at Raven Rock just before midnight. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own feet. My flashlight beam disappeared after maybe 3 feet, swallowed by the gray mist that seemed to move with a life of its own. The overlook was empty except for police tape fluttering in the wind. But I could feel them watching me, waiting. I set down Thomas's tobacco on the stone barrier and spoke in Cherokee, using words my grandmother had taught me years ago. Ozda Sunale. Good evening. I am Marcus Eagleclaw. I come in peace, seeking to understand your pain. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in clouds and frost started forming on the metal railings. Then they appeared. 12 skulls floating in the fog like deadly moons. Human skulls, but wrong somehow. Too big. Eye sockets that glowed with pale light. Jaws that moved when they spoke, even though there were no vocal cords, no tongues, no throats. They surrounded me in a perfect circle, and when they spoke, it was like listening to an echo from the bottom of a well. Galvquohi Higilvski, they said in unison. The murderer comes. I'm not a murderer, I said, still speaking Cherokee. I'm here to listen, to learn your story. The skull directly in front of me drifted closer. When it spoke, I recognized the voice from Sarah's recording. You wear the uniform of those who betrayed us. You serve the government that murdered us and buried our truth. Tell me your truth. I want to understand. For a moment, the skulls were silent. Then, one by one, they began to speak. The first skull told of being a Cherokee scout who was executed for warning white settlers about a planned raid. His own people called him traitor. The whites he tried to save stood by and watched him die. The second was a Cherokee woman accused of witchcraft, thrown from the cliff while her children watched. The third, fourth, and fifth were Cherokee men who had been caught stealing food during the harsh winter of 1812. Their crime was trying to keep their families alive. The sixth through ninth were former slaves, lynched during Reconstruction by white men who were never brought to justice. The 10th was a white man who had spoken out against the lynchings. His own neighbors killed him for it. The 11th was a Cherokee child, maybe 10 years old, killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the 12th made my heart stop. I was Cherokee police, the skull said, like you. I tried to bridge two worlds. I tried to bring justice to both peoples. They threw me off this cliff in 1923 for arresting a white man who murdered a Cherokee family. I stared at the skull, understanding flooding through me like cold water. You were Samuel Eagleclaw. Your great-grandfather, the skull confirmed. The one your family never talks about. The one whose death they covered up to avoid trouble with the white authorities. I'd heard whispers about Samuel growing up. Family stories that got cut short when adults realized children were listening. A relative who had died young, under circumstances nobody wanted to discuss. Now do you understand, descendant? This place claims those who serve authority, those who try to work within systems built on murder and lies. The other skulls drifted closer. I could feel their anger like heat from a fire. You will join us, they said together. Add your skull to our number. Help us make this place so terrible that no one will forget our suffering. No, I said. The word came out stronger than I felt. The skulls stopped moving. No? Samuel's skull asked. I understand your pain. I understand your anger. But killing innocent people won't bring you justice. It just creates more victims. Then what would you have us do? Wait another century for someone to acknowledge our deaths? Hope that someday someone will tell our true story? That's when I understood what they really wanted, what they'd always wanted. I'll tell your story, I said. Not just to tourists, to everyone. I'll work with the Cherokee Nation, with the Park Service, with historians. I'll make sure your deaths are remembered properly. I'll make sure people know the truth about what happened here. Words, the skulls hissed. Empty promises. We've heard them before. Not just words. A memorial. A proper burial for your remains. Cherokee ceremonies to put your spirit to. It's to rest. And education programs so people understand the real history of this place. Samuel's skull drifted directly in front of my face. And if you fail? If you make these promises and then forget, like all the others? Then I'll join you willingly, give you my spirit to add to your number." The skulls went silent. For long minutes, the only sound was wind through the trees and my own rapid heartbeat. Then Samuel spoke again. "You would stake your life on keeping these promises?" "Yes." "Your soul?" "Yes." The skull studied me with empty sockets that somehow still managed to convey deep thought. "Very well, but we want proof of your commitment. We want you to experience what we experienced." Before I could ask what that meant, the world exploded into pain. I felt myself falling, tumbling through space toward the rocks below. But this wasn't my fall. It was Samuel's. I was experiencing his death moment by moment. The betrayal of being arrested by his own people. The kangaroo court that condemned him. The long walk to the cliff edge with hands bound behind his back. Then another death. The Cherokee woman accused of witchcraft, feeling her children's eyes on her as she was pushed from the precipice. Another. All 12 deaths, one after another, each one searing itself into my memory with perfect, horrible clarity. When it finally ended, I was on my knees on the rocky ground, vomiting and shaking. The skulls floated above me, watching. "Now you know our pain," Samuel said. "Now you understand what we need." I wiped my mouth and stood on unsteady legs. "I understand. And I swear to you, on the graves of our ancestors, I will keep my promise." The skulls began to fade, becoming transparent in the fog. "We will be watching, great-grandson. We will be waiting. Disappoint us, and you know where to find us." As dawn broke over the mountains, I was alone on the overlook. But for the first time in days, the silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. It took me 3 months to keep my promise. 3 months of meetings with the Cherokee Nation, the National Park Service, historians, and government officials. 3 months of paperwork, proposals, and delicate negotiations between people who didn't always trust each other. But it happened. The memorial was dedicated on a cold February morning in 1974. 12 carved stones, one for each victim, arranged in a circle around a central marker that told the true history of Raven Rock. Cherokee elders performed blessing ceremonies. Representatives from the National Park Service formally acknowledged the injustices that had occurred on park land. Most importantly, we found the remains. Using Sarah's research and some traditional Cherokee methods that don't appear in any textbook, we located the bones and gave them proper burial in Cherokee soil. The skulls never appeared again. The overlook became a place of education instead of terror. Visitors still come for the scenic view, but now they also learn about the people who died there. They learn about the complex history of these mountains, the conflicts between different cultures, and the price of injustice. I stayed on as a ranger, but my role changed. I became the cultural liaison between the Park Service and the Cherokee Nation. I give talks about mountain history, lead memorial services for the victims, and make sure their story stays alive. Every month I visit the memorial. I leave tobacco and say prayers in Cherokee. Sometimes I talk to Samuel, telling him about the progress we're making, the people whose minds we're changing, the healing that's slowly happening in this place. The mountains feel different now, cleaner somehow. The ravens came back. Tourists take pictures without finding skulls in them. Families camp nearby without hearing voices in the night. But I haven't forgotten what I learned up there, about the weight of history, about the responsibility that comes with wearing a uniform, about the spirits that haunt places where injustice has been buried under comfortable lies. And sometimes, on foggy nights when the temperature drops just right, I still feel them watching. Not angry anymore, but vigilant, making sure I keep my promises, making sure their story doesn't get forgotten again. There are other places in these mountains, other sites where terrible things happened and were never acknowledged. Places where the spirits are still waiting for someone to tell their truth. I know because Samuel told me that last night on the overlook. Before his spirit finally found peace, he gave me a gift that felt more like a curse, the knowledge of where the other angry dead are waiting. Some nights, when I'm driving the mountain roads and see lights moving through the trees where no lights should be, I wonder if I'll have the strength to face them all, to carry their stories, to help them find the peace they've been denied. But that's a burden for another day. For now, it's enough to know that 12 souls found rest, and that Raven Rock Overlook stands as proof that the truth, no matter how terrible, is always better than a comfortable lie. The dead don't stay quiet forever. Eventually, they always find someone willing to listen. I just hope I'm strong enough to hear what they have to say.